The 51st plenary meeting of the 10th emergency session of the General Assembly is called to order. The General Assembly will continue its consideration of Agenda Item 5, entitled Illegal Israeli Actions in Occupied East Jerusalem and the Rest of the Occupied Palestinian Territory. I now give the floor to the representative of Nicaragua.
Señor Presidente, Nicaragua se asocia a los discursos pronunciados por Uganda en nombre del movimiento de países no alineados y de Venezuela en nombre del grupo de amigos en defensa de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Ante la continua política excepcionalista y de obstrucción de Estados Unidos en el Consejo de Seguridad, facilitando el genocidio y los crímenes de Israel en los territorios palestinos y árabes ocupados, la comunidad internacional y esta Asamblea General nos vimos en la necesidad y responsabilidad de tomar acciones y soluciones en derecho y justicia para con el pueblo palestino. Por más de 75 años, el pueblo palestino ha sido sometido a agresiones inhumanas, graves crímenes de guerra y ahora, por más de 200 días consecutivos, a un genocidio sin precedentes que ha dejado un saldo de más de 35.000 palestinos muertos y más de 78.000 heridos. Niños, niñas, mujeres y hombres han sido asesinados en sus casas, en las calles, en sus viajes huyendo del norte al sur, en los refugios del UNRWA, en hospitales, escuelas, mezquitas e iglesias. Los recientes ataques en Rafah demuestran aún más, como si no tuviéramos ya suficiente evidencia, que nos encontramos ante el empeño de hacer desaparecer al pueblo palestino. El gobierno y pueblo de Nicaragua reitera su firme solidaridad con el Estado de Palestina y condena enérgicamente estas atrocidades cometidas contra el pueblo palestino en Gaza, Cisjordania, Rafah y en todos sus históricos y legítimos territorios ocupados,
historic and legitimate territories occupied and divided by the government of Israel, in violation of the UN Charter, of international law, of international humanitarian law, and of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Attacks and shellings of civilian populations must cease immediately. The delivery of humanitarian aid to civilians is an urgent, vital necessity. The displacement of the Palestinian people must also end. Mr. President,
se hizo historia. La Asamblea General empezó a escuchar el clamor de los pueblos del mundo, apoyando a Palestina y el rechazo a este genocidio que se siente y se escucha en las calles, en las protestas, en los estudiantes que acampan. En ellos está la fuerza de lucha y de razón. Son millones y millones de personas exigiendo Palestina libre, el cese al fuego, el respeto a la vida, al fin de este genocidio y de la ocupación israelita de todos los territorios ocupados. La mañana del viernes se dio un paso importante en la restitución de los derechos inalienables del pueblo palestino. Quedó más que demostrado que es una ínfima minoría que caprichosamente continúa obstruyendo la materialización del Estado de Palestina. El mundo quiere la paz y una Palestina libre. El Consejo de Seguridad tiene que respetar y asumir esta resolución recién aprobada. Debe reconsiderar la solicitud y aceptar a Palestina como Estado libre e independiente. Estados Unidos no puede seguir negando el reconocimiento de un Estado de Palestina en Naciones Unidas.
State in the United Nations. It is unjustifiable and inappropriate. The full integration of Palestine into our community of nations is a vital act of justice and freedom for the creation of a Palestinian state and the achievement of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, their freedom, their self-determination, independence, and their right to live in peace within the 1967 57 borders
y con Jerusalén
with
Oriental
East
como su
Jerusalem
capital.
as capital.
Señor
Mr.
presidente,
President,
cada vez somos más
more
países
and
que
more
reconocemos al
countries
Estado
are
de Palestina.
recognizing the state of Palestine.
Saludamos el reciente
We
anuncio
welcome
de
the
Bahamas
recent
y Trinidad y
announcement by
Tobago,
Bahamas and
reconociendo
Trinidad and
oficialmente
Tobago
a Palestina
officially
como Estado.
recognizing Palestine
Ya
as a
somos
state.
144
We are now
estados en estos últimos días.
144 states who have
Nuestra
joined
América
us
Latina y
and
Caribeña,
have come together
nuestra
in
zona de
recent
paz,
days. Our
siempre ha
Latin
sido
American and
firme en
Caribbean
su lucha
region,
anticolonial
our zone of peace
y en
has always
apoyar la
stood firm against
autodeterminación de los
colonialism
pueblos.
and in support of the
32 de los
self-determination
33
of
estados de nuestra
peoples.
región
32 of the
ya
33
reconocen al
states in
Estado de
our region
Palestina
already
y esperamos
recognize
que
the
muy
state of
pronto el
Palestine,
último estado
and we hope
pendiente
that very
anuncie su
soon the one remaining
reconocimiento al Estado de
state
Palestina.
will announce its recognition of the
Estados
state of
Unidos y países
Palestine.
europeos tienen la
The
obligación
United
moral
States and
e
European
histórica de
countries have
reconocer
the
y
moral and
respetar al
historical
Estado libre,
obligation to recognize
independiente y
and
soberano de
respect the
Palestina,
free,
a los
independent
gobiernos
and
y
sovereign
pueblos de la
state of
región
Palestine.
y del
The
mundo que
governments
exigen
and peoples
convivir
of the
con
region
seguridad
and the
común para
world
todos,
must call for
estabilidad
shared,
y
safe
paz,
coexistence
con el
for
Estado
all,
palestino
stability
formando
and
parte de
peace
Naciones
with
Unidas.
the Palestinian state as part
Escuchen las
of the
voces de la
United
humanidad
Nations.
entera que
Listen
claman
to the
por paz,
voices of all of
justicia,
mankind who
por
cry
una
out for
Palestina
peace,
libre,
justice, for a
que
free
pongan fin a sus
Palestine,
injustificables
for an
políticas de
end
negación
to
y
unjustified
exclusión de los
policies
derechos
of
inalienables
denial
del
and the
pueblo
exclusion
palestino.
of the inalienable rights of the
Nicaragua no
Palestinian
cesará su
people.
incondicional apoyo a
Nicaragua
Palestina
will
y
stand
junto a la comunidad
steadfast in support of
internacional
Palestine, and together with
continuaremos
the
todo
international
esfuerzo e
community,
iniciativa
we will
necesaria
continue with
para
every
avanzar en la
effort and
cuestión de
initiative
Palestina
necessary to
hasta
move
alcanzar
forward
la
the
liberación de
question of
Palestina.
Palestine until Palestine is
Liberación
free.
que prevalezca la vida,
So that
liberación para que
life can
prevalezca la
flourish,
paz.
free so that
Muchas
peace can
gracias.
prevail. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nicaragua. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Mr. President, my delegation thanks you for convening today's plenary meeting following the joint request by the Arab Group, Non-Aligned Movement, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Malaysia aligns itself with the NAM and OIC statements and adds the following remarks in its national capacity. Mr. President, after more than 7 decades since the adoption of General Assembly Resolution 181 in 1947, which partitioned Palestinians' land into Arab and Jewish states, Palestinians continue to be denied their right to statehood. In contrast, Israel was accepted as a full member in 1949. Since then, the world has been witnessing turmoil and bloodshed in the land of Palestine. For 7 decades, Israel's illegal, brutal, and inhumane occupation has dispossessed Palestinians of their lands, properties, rights, and dignity. It has taken the lives of countless numbers of innocent men, women, and children, and continue to do so to this day. The current hostilities in Gaza are the latest episode in the already long history of Palestinian struggle under Israeli occupation. After about 7 months of relentless Israeli military onslaught, more than 35,000 deaths have been recorded, about 70% of whom are women and children. That is nearly 15,000 children and 10,000 women killed. The discoveries of mass graves in the compounds of Al-Shifa and Nasser hospitals are deeply concerning. The numbers of deaths among humanitarian workers and media personnel have also reached new records. The level of destruction of civilian infrastructure, including schools, hospitals, and UN premises, is unprecedented. The unrelenting destruction of Gaza and catastrophic humanitarian condition of its inhabitants are downright appalling. And despite warnings of disastrous humanitarian consequences, Israel remains adamant to mount a ground military assault of Rafah. The carnage in Gaza must stop. The international community must demand proper accountability processes, starting with thorough, transparent, and independent international investigations on all breaches of international law, including possible acts of war crime and genocide in Gaza. Mr. President, the question of Palestine must be resolved once and for all. Israel's occupation must end. Justice must be restored. The self-determination of the Palestinian people must be upheld. The fully sovereign state of Palestine must be recognized. For those of us who still remember the misery of life under occupation or colonization and the bitter struggle of our forefathers for independence and statehood, it is our responsibility to support Palestinian statehood. It is our collective moral duty to do everything we can to ensure that the state of Palestine take its rightful place as our equal in this august chamber. The fundamental United Nations founding principle of equality among nations must be extended to the state of Palestine without any discrimination nor further delay. Malaysia's support towards Palestinian statehood and its membership to the United Nations is long-standing. We hold the view that the admission of the State of Palestine as a full member should have happened when General Assembly Resolution 181 was adopted and Israel was admitted 75 years ago. The resolution adopted by the Assembly last Friday is a significant step forward. It is a much-needed positive development in the face of the Security Council's continued politicization and paralysis. The adoption of the text by an overwhelming majority is a clear testament of the enormous support for the Palestinian statehood within the international community. Malaysia shares the view that the State of Palestine meets the 4 criteria for statehood outlined in the 1933 Montevideo Convention. We also firmly believe that the State of Palestine fulfills the conditions for membership to the United Nations as laid out in Article 4 of the Charter. Palestine has consistently demonstrated that it is committed to peace, even as Israel persists with its brutal and oppressive occupation, continues to erode its territorial integrity, and attempts to annihilate the Palestinian people. It is also clear to us that Palestine highly values the opportunities to participate in UN processes, and it is able and willing to carry out obligations enshrined in the Charter. Palestine has beyond doubt proven itself worthy of membership of this organization. In contrast, Israel continues to breach international law, defy UN resolutions, as well as vilify and malign the United Nations and its officials. Israel's actions, which each passing day inevitably raise our doubts if it actually believes in the UN system and values its membership in this organization. The offensive gimmick of shredding the UN Charter we witnessed in this chamber last Friday is just another example of Israel's utter disrespect of the United Nations. Ironically, it is Israel's credibility that is being shredded to pieces through their contempt for international law and norms. No cheap theatrics will ever deny the resounding support for the resolution, as well as the enduring relevance of the Charter's principles and aspirations. Mr. President, assertions that the State of Palestine does not meet the criteria for membership set forth in Article 4 of the UN Charter are absurd and quite suspicious. Such allegations are blatant rejection of General Assembly and Security Council resolutions that have recognized Palestine as a state. To date, 144 members of the United Nations have recognized the State of Palestine, and several countries have announced their intention of recognizing Palestine in the very near future. We encourage those who have not officially recognized Palestine to do so without further delay. Mr. President, the question of Palestine has remained an outstanding issue in this organization for more than 7 decades. It is high time that the UN deliver on its duty and responsibility and produce a just, lasting, and peaceful solution to the question of Palestine. This should start with the recognition of the State of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, in accordance with the internationally recognized two-state solution. We, the independent and sovereign member states of the United Nations, must not renege on our commitment to uphold the United Nations principle of equality among nations. We must not fail our Palestinian brothers and sisters in their struggle for self-determination. We must not forget, most of us here were once in their shoes. Palestinians too deserve to live in peace, to develop, and to prosper. We shall not and must not succumb to the pressure of those who seek to undermine peace in the Middle East. We call on all member states to be united and support efforts towards lasting peace in the Middle East. The full membership of the State of Palestine of the United Nations is a critical step towards this end. Malaysia stands ready to be part of and support initiatives aimed at realizing the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to freedom and self-determination. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malaysia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bahrain.
Mr. President, allow me to thank you for resuming the 10th emergency special session of the General Assembly. My delegation aligns itself with the statement delivered by the UAE on behalf of the Arab Group, Mauritania on behalf of the OIC, and Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Mr. President, we welcome the adoption by the General Assembly last Friday of Resolution A/ES/ES-10/23 with 143 states voting favorably on the eligibility of the Palestinian state to be granted full membership at the United Nations, and on recommending that the Security Council reconsider the matter favorably and grant Palestine additional privileges and rights regarding its participation in this international organization. We stress the need for diplomatic and humanitarian efforts to support the legitimate historic rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination, freedom, justice, equality, independence, and ending the occupation in line with international law. We reaffirm that the full international acknowledgement of the full international recognition of the Palestinian state and its membership at the United Nations is a political and legal right. It is inalienable and a legitimate historic right of the Palestinian people to establish their independent state on the borders of 1967 with East Jerusalem as a capital based on the two-state solution in line with the resolutions of international legitimacy, the Arab Peace Initiative, and this is a major step to promote just, sustainable, and comprehensive peace in the Middle East. Mr. President, we condemn the Israeli military operations on Rafah, the last safe haven for more than 1 million Palestinian people. We condemned its control over the Rafah land crossing in southern Gaza. We warned against the dangerous repercussions of that on innocent civilians. We once again call upon the international community and influential parties at the Security Council to immediately and urgently interfere to ensure a humanitarian truce and to stop any military expansion to protect peace and security regionally. In conclusion, it is important to continue supporting the Palestinian people so that they can be granted their legitimate national rights. It is important to support every effort to ensure a ceasefire in Gaza, the delivery of humanitarian assistance to civilians, and launching a serious and genuine political process to ensure sustainable and comprehensive peace in the region in order to establish an independent Palestinian state on the borders of 1967 with East Jerusalem as a capital on the basis of the two-state solution and based on the resolutions of international legitimacy, the Arab Peace Initiative, and granting Palestine full membership at the United Nations. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Bahrain. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Mr. President, thank you for resuming the 10th Emergency Special Session at the request of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Arab League, and non-allied movement groups. This august body, the General Assembly, as the most representative organ of the United Nations, has expressed the collective stance of the international community by adopting the resolution on Palestine's admission as a member to the United Nations with 143 positive votes. Turkey is proud to have co-sponsored this historic resolution. The adoption of this resolution not only marks a significant milestone in Palestine's pursuit of statehood, but also highlights the growing disparity between the Security Council and the collective voice of the international community. Mr. President, 7 months into the conflict, the dire situation in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank persists. The Palestinian people are brutally targeted with total disregard of the international law and international humanitarian law. The recent escalations, the recent attacks in Rafah, as well as the wider region, are deeply worrying. The discovery of mass graves in Gaza underscores the severity of the situation. People in Gaza are facing catastrophic levels of hunger. UNRWA, the backbone of the humanitarian operations in Gaza, is under political and physical attack. Disrupting UNRWA's work would not only exacerbate the suffering, but also destabilize the entire region. Despite this unprecedented humanitarian tragedy, the inability to halt bloodshed and man-made famine in Gaza is deplorable and shameful. Mr. President, since the conflict's onset, the international community's demands have been clear: an immediate ceasefire, unimpeded humanitarian aid, and end to forced displacement. 2 resolutions adopted by this august body, as well as the Security Council Resolution 2728, calling for a ceasefire, have not been implemented yet. The provisional measures by the International Court of Justice, Security Council resolutions on humanitarian aid, and fundamental principles of international law are disregarded. The gravest violations of the UN Charter is taking place before our own eyes in Gaza. This has been coupled with the attempts to insult the UN and its charter under this roof. It is our duty as the international community to make sure that this lawlessness and impunity comes to an end. We call on the Security Council to take swift action, starting with an immediate ceasefire. The brutality and the bloodshed in Gaza have persisted for too long. This must end now, and its recurrence must be prevented through a durable two-state solution. A two-state solution offers the sole prospect of breaking the cycle of violence. Mr. President, Turkey supports the application of Palestine for its admission as a full member of the United Nations. This step will enable Palestinians to achieve their aspirations for statehood, sovereignty, and independence fostering momentum for a two-state solution, which is the only way to serve through justice. Palestine deserves to be a full member and to be treated as an equal member of the international community. Security Council resolutions envision a region where two states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side within secure and recognized borders. The longer this vision is deferred, the longer the region will be pushed into vicious circles of violence and destruction. With the adoption of this resolution, the wider membership has determined that the state of Palestine is qualified for membership in the United Nations and recommended that the Security Council reconsider the matter favorably. The overwhelming majority in the Security Council is already in favor. We urge the Security Council to take concrete steps toward realizing a political solution based on the two-state vision and pre-67 borders, with East Jerusalem as the capital of an independent, sovereign, and contiguous state of Palestine. In conclusion, I welcome the Palestinian delegation to participate in the works of this assembly. Thank you, Mr. President, and all delegations voted for this resolution.
I thank the distinguished representative of Turkey. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
السيد الرئيس
Mr. President,
أتوجه إليكم بالشكر
I
على
thank
عقد
you for
هذه الجلسة.
convening this session.
يؤيد لبنان
Lebanon
البيان
aligns
الذي
itself with
أدلى
the
به
statement
وفد
delivered
الإمارات
by
العربية
the United Arab
المتحدة
Emirates
نيابة
on
عن
behalf
المجموعة
of the
العربية.
Arab group.
السيد الرئيس
Mr. President,
يرحب لبنان
Lebanon
بتبني
welcomes
الجمعية
the
العامة
General Assembly
للقرار
adoption
المتعلق
of
بقبول أعضاء جدد في
resolution on
الأمم
admission
المتحدة.
of new members to the UN.
لقد أنصفت
Through this
الجمعية العامة
long-awaited
فلسطين
resolution, the General
وإن طال
Assembly has done
الانتظار
right by Palestine
بالإقرار
by
بحقها
recognizing
بأخذ
its
مكانها
right to
الطبيعي
take
بين
its
الأمم
rightful place among nations,
وحسمت
and
النقاش
concluded
حول
that the
أهليتها
discussion regarding
لعضوية
its
الأمم المتحدة
eligibility for UN
وفقا
membership
للمادة
in
الرابعة
accordance with
من ميثاق
Article
الأمم
4
المتحدة.
of the UN Charter.
يبقى أن
It is
ينصت
up
مجلس
now
الأمن
for
إلى
the
هذا
Security
القرار
Council to
الواضح
listen to this
والجلي
clear resolution
الصادر عن الجمعية
by the General
العامة
Assembly,
وأن يعيد
and to
النظر في طلب
reconsider
عضوية
Palestine's
فلسطين بشكل
application
إيجابي ودون
positively
تأخير.
and without delay.
ف75 عاما من
75
الانتظار
years
كافية.
is a long time.
السيد الرئيس
Mr. President,
ينص القرار على
the
تعزيز
resolution
مشاركة
calls for
دولة
strengthening
فلسطين
Palestine's
في دورات
participation
وأعمال
in
الجمعية
sessions and
العامة
works of the General
والمؤتمرات
Assembly,
الدولية
international conferences
التي تعقد
that
تحت
are
رعاية
convened
الجمعية
under
أو
the
الأجهزة
auspices
الأخرى
of the General
التابعة
Assembly
للأمم
or other
المتحدة.
organs of the UN.
ونرى في ذلك
We see
تأكيدا من
in this
الجمعية
a
العامة
reiteration
على
by the
قدرة
General Assembly
فلسطين
that Palestine
على
is
التفاعل
capable
الإيجابي
to
في
engage
الأمم
positively
المتحدة
within
ومع
the
الدول
UN and
الأعضاء
with the member states.
في إطار تعزيز مقاصد
the
وغايات الأمم المتحدة
Process
ومنها
of
التسامح
strengthening the
والعيش
principles
في
and goals of
سلام
the
وحسن
UN,
الجوار
including tolerance,
وضم
living in
إرادتها
peace
إلى
and good
إرادة
neighborly
المجتمع الدولي
relations, and
لحفظ
join its
السلم
will
والأمن
with the
الدوليين.
international community to
السيد الرئيس
maintain international peace and
يكرر
security.
التعبير
We
عن
reiterate
الأسف
our deep
الشديد
regret for the
لعدم تمكن
inability of the
المجلس
Council
في
on the
18 من
18th
نيسان
of
الماضي
April
من تمرير
to
مشروع
adopt a
القرار
draft
المقدم من
resolution
الجزائر
tabled by Algeria
والذي يوصي
recommending
بمنح
the
فلسطين
granting
عضوية
of
كاملة
full
في
membership
هذه
to
المنظمة.
Palestine.
ونحثه
We
على
urge the
مراجعة
Council
موقفه
to
بأسرع
reconsider
وقت.
its position as
ونرى
soon as
أن فشل
possible. We
المجلس
see
في تمرير مشروع
that this
القرار
failure
يساهم
would
بإطالة
only
أمد
further
الصراع
prolong
أكثر.
this conflict.
ولا بد
We
أن نحيي
salute
الدول
all
التي
states
اعترفت
who
مؤخرا
recently have
بفلسطين
recognized
والذين
Palestine,
انضموا إلى
joining more
أكثر
than
من 140 دولة
140 countries
سبق
who
أن
have
اعترفت
already
بها.
recognized
ونحث
Palestine.
المزيد من
We
الدول على
urge
الإقدام
more
على
countries
هذه
to
الخطوة
follow
النبيلة
suit this
والمبدئية
noble and
والتي لا
principled
شك
step which
أنها تدعم
undoubtedly
جهود
would
تحقيق
support
السلام
the efforts to
والتوصل
realize
لحل
peace and
الدولتين.
achieve the two-state
فقيام
solution.
الدولة
The
الفلسطينية
establishment of the Palestinian
هو
state
مفتاح
is the
الحل
key to
لكل
all
أزمات
crises
المنطقة
in the region.
وهو الطريق
Is
إلى
the road
الاستقرار
to stability,
تمهيدا
paving the
للوصول
way
إلى
to
الأمن
peace
والأمان
and
لجميع
security for
شعوب
all
المنطقة.
peoples of the region.
السيد الرئيس،
Mr. President,
7
it has
أشهر
been 7
طويلة
long,
وأليمة
painful
ودموية
and bloody months
مرت
for
على
the
أهل
people
غزة
in Gaza
وجنوب
and southern
لبنان.
Lebanon.
لذا
Therefore,
نطالب
we call
بوقف
for an
فوري
immediate and
ومستدام
sustainable
لإطلاق النار
ceasefire
دون
without a
تأخير،
delay to
تجنبا
avoid
لخروج
a
الأمور
spiraling
عن
of matters
السيطرة
out of control
وتوسع رقعة
and a
الحرب
spillover
إقليميا،
of the conflict
وصونا
regionally
لدماء المدنيين
to save
الذين
the
يقتلون
civilians who
يوميا.
are being killed on a daily
ونكرر
basis.
المطالبة
We reiterate the
بالالتزام
demand
بالقرارات
to comply
الصادرة
with
عن
resolutions
الجمعية
of the General
العامة وعن
Assembly and the
مجلس الأمن
Security Council
المطالبة
demanding a
بوقف لإطلاق
ceasefire,
النار
the latest of which
وآخرها
has
القرار
been Resolution
2728،
2728.
وتركيز
We call
الجهود
on
على
focusing
إنجاح الوساطة
efforts on
التي بادرت
supporting a
بها
successful
قطر
conclusion
ومصر
of mediation
والتي
efforts
قبلتها
by Qatar
حماس،
and Egypt and that were
ونطالب
accepted by
بالضغط على
Hamas. We
إسرائيل
call on
للقبول
for
أيضا
exerting
بهذه
pressure on
الوساطة
Israel to
دون
accept
تأخير
these
وعدم
mediation efforts
اجتياح
without
رفح.
delay and refrain from a ground
السيد الرئيس،
invasion of Rafah.
لبنان
Mr.
يؤكد
President,
مرة جديدة
Lebanon
التزامه
reiterates yet
الكامل
again
بالقرار
its full compliance with
1701،
Resolution
وهو
1701.
يبذل كل الجهود
Exerting
السياسية
all
والدبلوماسية
political and
لتطبيقه
diplomatic efforts
وعودة
to
الاستقرار
implement it and
والهدوء
restore
لحدوده
stability and
الجنوبية،
calm to its southern
تمهيدا
borders
لعودة
to
الأهالي
allow
إلى
the
قراهم
residents to go back to
وبيوتهم.
their villages and
كما
homes.
نرحب بجهود
We
الدول
welcome the
الصديقة
efforts
وعلى
of friendly
رأسهم
countries,
الولايات
particularly
المتحدة
the US
الأمريكية
and
وفرنسا،
France,
لما
for all
يقومان
the
به
efforts
من
to
جهود
prevent
من أجل
a
عدم توسيع
spillover of
الحرب
the conflict
والمساعدة
and
بإيجاد
to
حل
contribute
سلمي.
towards a peaceful settlement of the
السيد الرئيس،
situation. Mr. President,
نطالب مجددا
we call
بالعمل
again
بشكل
for
جدي
serious
على إعادة
efforts to
إحياء
revive
الأفق
the
السياسي
political
لحل
horizon of the
الدولتين
two-state solution,
وإنهاء الاحتلال
to end the
الإسرائيلي
Israeli occupation and to
والاعتراف
recognize
بالدولة
the
الفلسطينية
independent
المستقلة
Palestinian state
على حدود
on
الرابع
the
من
4th of
حزيران
June
لعام
1967 borders
1967
with its
عاصمتها القدس
capital
الشرقية
East Jerusalem
وفق مرجعيات
in line
الحل
with the terms of
وإيجاد
reference
حل
and
عادل
find a
لقضية
just solution for the
اللاجئين
question of
وقضايا
refugees and
الحل
all
النهائي
final status
وفق
issues
قرارات
in
الشرعية
line with
الدولية
international resolutions
ومبادرة
and the
السلام
Arab
العربية
Peace
في بيروت
Initiative that was
بعام
launched in Beirut
2002
in
وانسحاب
2002
إسرائيل من
and Israel's
الأراضي
withdrawal
العربية
from the
المحتلة.
occupied Arab
وشكرا
territories.
السيد
Thank you,
الرئيس.
Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of Lebanon. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since its establishment, the United Nations have served as a platform for dialogue. On many of the issues we address, the UN member states do not agree. We have a diversity of opinions, backgrounds, and positions, but this diversity can only be bridged through the dialogue. In our view, the self-determination of peoples is one of the cornerstones for achieving a strong multilateral system. The Slovenian people were able to exercise this right in order to freely establish their own sovereign and independent states. Moreover, for Slovenia, becoming a member of the UN signified a major accomplishment in our diplomatic efforts following our declaration of independence. With these memories still fresh, we understand and empathize with Palestine's aspiration to attain the same goal. Mr. President, only through a two-state solution where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side, will bring the long-lasting peace to the region. In a given situation, we firmly believe in two-layered approach. We must most urgently address the current catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, and we need to resume the political process towards a two-state solution. In the Security Council, Slovenia voted in favor of the recommendation for membership of the State of Palestine in the UN and clearly explained its vote. We trust this could significantly support the peace process, which should address all outstanding issues, support the State of Palestine, and guarantee security of Israel. The United Nations has had an important role on the question of Palestine for decades. We are of the view that UN should play a crucial role in the peace processes, and therefore both states should have an equal status in the organization. Each journey is a sequence of steps. Granting membership in the UN to Palestine could be one of these important steps towards peace. Slovenia therefore supports that Security Council continues to deliberate on this question, whereas also underlines that the road to admission of Palestine as a full member of the UN must continue fully in line with the UN Charter. As this process is taking place, Slovenia supports the enhancement of the rights of Palestine in the UN. Amidst the diversity of views at the UN, we always place the UN Charter at the center of our discussions. In that sense, we welcome that the main sponsors of the resolution we adopted on Friday have made necessary and important changes to address concerns of several member states during negotiations. But Slovenia looks forward to the moment when the UN General Assembly will welcome Palestine as a full member of the UN. We appreciate the legal clarity provided on this distinction of rights. Mr. President, dialogue must prevail over weapons in Gaza. Choosing a peaceful way is not always easy, and we welcome the state of Palestine choosing peace through this resolution. Here at the UN, we recognize their daily choice of peace through meetings, resolutions, different means of settlement of disputes under Article 33, and a commitment to engagement. Our vote was therefore a clear signal of support to the continuously choosing the dialogue. I thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Slovenia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Mr. President, my delegation aligns itself with the statement delivered by Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. I wish to make the following observations, however, in my national capacity. Excellencies, distinguished representatives, it has been said that in the heart of adversity, hope emerges as the strongest force for change. And from the seeds of hope, the tree of peace shall grow, sheltering both nations. We must, therefore, my dear friends, generously nourish that growth. That is my delegation's sincere hope. Sri Lanka supported the call for the admission of the state of Palestine as a member of this assembly in an enhanced status. We have consistently maintained that position, that a just and lasting solution can only be achieved based on a two-state solution on the basis of the borders of the 4th of June 1967. Mr. President, a peaceful and stable Middle East fundamentally depends on whether a two-state solution becomes a reality or not. It is sometimes difficult to find an intelligible rationale to the paradox as to how, while ostensibly supporting a two-state solution, the various state members oppose the admission of the state of Palestine as a regular member of the United Nations. Mr. President, the developments since 7th of October last year have called into question our fundamental humanity as the continued massacre of civilians takes place, with live reports reaching our homes, our workplaces on a daily basis. Mr. President, in your address to the General Assembly on the 8th of April, you very rightly termed the conflict in Gaza as a blight on our common humanity, which is, in the words of the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator Martin Griffiths, he described it as unparalleled in its intensity, brutality, and scope. Mr. President, there are several reasons that can be urged in this August Assembly to support this resolution, which we have done, that we have endorsed in its present form, which would give Palestine an enhanced status and recognition that would necessarily require the stakeholders to give Palestine their long-eluded standing in the international community. What is it that Palestine can enjoy more than what they enjoy now? My dear friends, it can enjoy enhanced UN membership, which will allow Palestine to actively participate in global efforts to maintain peace and security. It will ensure sovereignty and equality. You will appreciate that enhanced UN membership ensures that a country is recognized as a member state with recognized rights and responsibilities. It provides access to various resources and assistance programs offered by this organization. It strengthens international relations. Think about it. Being a member of the UN enhances its credibility and legitimacy in the international community. It facilitates enhanced diplomatic relations and opens doors for bilateral and multilateral cooperation, trade, and investment. It helps address global challenges. Enhanced membership will enable Palestine to actively participate in addressing global challenges collectively, such as climate change, poverty, terrorism, human rights violations, and public health crises. It will provide a platform to collaborate with other countries and work towards finding collective solutions. And finally, it will place a demand on Palestine itself to uphold international law and human rights. Enhanced membership signifies, therefore, a commitment, I say, to upholding international law, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, and would allow Palestine to engage in discussions, negotiations, and initiatives at promoting and protecting human rights globally. Mr. President, the time, I say, is therefore ripe for this Assembly that has proclaimed with a resounding majority its desire and will that Palestine be granted the status of an enhanced UN membership as envisaged in the resolution that we have now put in place. This Assembly has proclaimed its intentions in the clearest of terms, with an overwhelming decision affirming its will to grant the state of Palestine the right of enhanced membership. Mr. President, we cannot tarry over the right of the Palestinian people to participate in the work of this organization on an equal basis with other member states any longer. Mr. President, to remain in the current state of inertia will surely undermine, I say, and put at stake the moral and ethical foundation of the international system based on the UN Charter and the rule of law. It has been accepted that the state of Palestine has fulfilled the requirements in terms of Article 4. It has accepted the UN Charter as a peace-loving state. It is a member of the non-aligned movement, a member of the G77 in China, a member of the Asia-Pacific group of states, as well as other groupings. The delegation of Palestine, Excellencies, participates in the proceedings of this organization day in and day out in the ordinary course of its work. It is not right, we believe, that a single country or a minority group can stand in the way of an overwhelming majority of the international community. So let us today give the people of Palestine the dignity they deserve, and at the same time give humanity the hope that something is right in this world. It is time to act now. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Costa Rica.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President,
la cuestión de Palestina se encuentra en
the
la agenda de la
Palestinian
organización
question has
desde
remained on the organization's agenda
1947.
since 1947.
Esta asamblea le concedió el estatus de observador no miembro de las
This
Naciones
General Assembly
Unidas en
granted
el
Palestine
2011,
non-member observer
luego de que
status in the
su
United
solicitud de
Nations in
ingreso como
2011,
miembro pleno
following
fue rechazada por
the
el
Security
Consejo de
Council's
Seguridad.
rejection of its application for full
13
membership.
años más tarde
13
se
years
revive
later,
la solicitud de Palestina.
Palestine's
Costa Rica
application has been
reconoció al Estado
revitalized.
Palestina en el 2007
In 2007, Costa Rica recognized the State of Palestine and voted in favor of such a resolution. Our country, which recognized the State of Israel immediately after its proclamation in 1948, established diplomatic relations in 1954, also voted in favor of Israel's admission as a full member of this organization on May 11, 1949.
Desde 1945,
Since 1945, 142 states have joined the United Nations.
Todos ellos han solicitado unirse a esta organización que
All of them
clama en su carta
sought to apply
constitutiva
because
que
the
en ella
UN
se
is an
encuentran
organization that pledges
representados
under
we the
its charter
peoples,
to represent
nosotros los pueblos.
we the peoples.
En este momento,
At this moment,
144
144
estados
countries
Palestina
recognize
como Estado.
Palestine as a state.
La mayoría de dichos países,
The majority of these
incluso
countries,
muchos que
including
aún no lo han
many who have
reconocido,
not yet done so
clamamos por
formally,
una resolución
call for a
pacífica
peaceful
del conflicto
resolution of the
palestino-israelí
Israeli-Palestinian conflict through the implementation of the two-state solution
con la resolución
pursuant
242
to
de
Resolution 242
1967.
of
La solución
1967.
de los dos estados es la
The
opción
two-state
para
solution
responder a las necesidades de
is the
seguridad
option
a
which
largo
meets the
plazo
long-term
de
security
ambos
needs of
países
both
y a
countries
las legítimas
and the legitimate
aspiraciones de ambos
aspirations of their
pueblos
peoples
de vivir en paz,
to live in peace,
prosperidad y con
prosperity, and
seguridad.
with dignity and
No es
security.
congruente
It is
abogar por la solución
inconsistent
de
to
dos
advocate
estados,
for the two-state
pero negar el
solution, yet
reconocimiento como
deny
estado de pleno
full state
de uno de
recognition
ellos,
to one of them.
solo en situaciones de igualdad de
Only in
derechos
situations of
e
equal
igualdad
rights
de
and equal
reconocimiento a sus
recognition of
legítimas
their legitimate
aspiraciones
aspirations
podremos
can
avanzar
we
en
advance
una solución
a
justa y
just and
equitativa
equitable
para
solution
ambos países
for both
y
countries
principalmente
and
para
primarily
ambos
for both
pueblos.
peoples.
Ambos deben poder ver
Both must
cumplido
be
su
able to
derecho a
fulfill their right to
autogobernarse y a
self-govern
ser
and to be
reconocidos.
recognized.
Costa Rica votó a favor
Costa
de esta
Rica voted in
resolución
favor
para
of this
sumar su
resolution
voz a este urgente llamado.
To articulate the
Confiamos
urgency of this call,
en que el
we
Consejo de
trust
Seguridad
that the Security
hará lo
Council
correcto.
will do the right
Es
thing.
hora de acoger en el seno de esta organización al
Within this
Estado número
organization,
194.
it is time
El
to
Estado de
welcome the
Palestina, en
194th state,
concordancia
the
con
state
nuestros
of
principios
Palestine, in
fundacionales.
accordance with our
Si
founding
logramos
principles.
contar con ambos
If we manage
estados
to have
con
both
el
states
mismo reconocimiento
with the
internacional
same
en esta
international
organización,
recognition in this
estaremos más
organization,
cerca de una
we will be
verdadera
closer
posibilidad de paz,
to a real
seguridad
possibility
y
of
reconciliación
peace, security,
para
and
Medio Oriente
reconciliation for the
y de
Middle
mayor
East
esperanza
and
para
greater
el mundo
hope
entero.
for the entire
Muchas
world.
gracias.
Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Costa Rica. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway.
President, Norway strongly supports the Palestinian people's rights and aspirations of statehood in accordance with international law. Palestinian statehood is a condition for the realization of the two-state solution in line with the UN Partition Plan of 1947. It is Norway's long-held conviction that a Palestinian state must comprise the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, and be based on the 1967 borders. Norway has been clear that we are ready to support an application for full membership of the United Nations for Palestine when the issue is brought before the General Assembly. We believe that such a membership would increase the possibility to achieve a political settlement beneficial for both Israelis and Palestinians. We underline that the formal procedure of admission to full membership in the United Nations, according to the UN Charter, will be affected by a decision of the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council. By co-sponsoring and voting yes to the resolution on membership of the State of Palestine, we have reaffirmed our full support for a just, lasting and comprehensive peace in the Middle East, and underscored the importance of a much needed settlement to this conflict. We recall the commitments made by the State of Palestine in this regard, including in its application for UN membership. Although our affirmative vote in favor of the resolution does not prejudge the nation of Palestine, an issue which we are actively considering, it is testimony to Norway's strong and unequivocal commitment to the two-state solution. This entails a sovereign, democratic, contiguous, and viable Palestinian state living side by side with the State of Israel in peace within secure and recognized borders. President, after more than 7 months of war, all eyes are now on Rafah. Norway remains deeply concerned about the recent escalation of hostilities in Rafah, which suggests a larger military operation may be imminent. We call on Israeli authorities to halt the operation. The more than 1 million who have sought refuge in Rafah have already fled multiple times from famine, death, and horror. They are now being told to move again, but no place in Gaza is safe. We stress the urgent need to ensure safe, rapid, unimpeded, and sustained humanitarian access to all the people in need in all of Gaza, and that all available crossings into Gaza remain open so that essential supplies, including aid and fuel, can enter Gaza. We mourn with the Palestinians that have fallen victim to this war and their families that desperate are searching for safety and an end to this war. We mourn with the Israeli victims, hostages, and their families. This war has to stop. There is a desperate need for a ceasefire and the immediate release of all remaining hostages. And we must embark on a path to a political solution. President, only a negotiated solution between the parties can bring lasting peace and security for both Palestinian and Israelis, as well as the wider region. We appeal to both sides to build on Friday's decision in a constructive manner and urgently resume comprehensive and good faith negotiations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Norway. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chile.
Presidente, agradecemos esta convocatoria del 10º periodo extraordinario de sesiones de emergencia de la Asamblea General para discutir un proyecto de resolución presentado por Emiratos Árabes Unidos en nombre del Grupo Árabe que determina que el Estado de Palestina cumple los requisitos para ser miembro de las Naciones Unidas de acuerdo con el artículo 4 de la Carta y por lo tanto debe ser admitido como miembro de las Naciones Unidas. Chile suscribe la intervención realizada por Uganda en nombre del movimiento de los países no alineados. Asimismo, Chile reafirma su apoyo al Estado de Palestina para que sea admitido como miembro de pleno derecho de las Naciones Unidas. Por esta razón, copatrocinamos el citado proyecto de resolución. Desde el 7 de octubre, la mayoría de los miembros de esta organización y también autoridades de la misma han reiterado que no lograr avances hacia una solución de dos estados solo aumenta la volatilidad y el riesgo para millones de personas en toda la región que siguen viviendo bajo la amenaza constante de la violencia. Por esto es que la admisión del Estado de Palestina a las Naciones Unidas debe ser concedida con urgencia. Señor Presidente, deseamos expresar una vez más las condolencias de Chile a las familias y seres queridos de las víctimas que han muerto en el conflicto que azota a la Franja de Gaza. Somos especialmente sensibles por las mujeres y los niños inocentes que han padecido en esta catástrofe. Subrayamos que la violencia no se soluciona con más violencia. Extendemos nuestra profunda solidaridad con los heridos. Reiteramos el completo apoyo al dedicado y valiente trabajo que están realizando las Naciones Unidas, sus agencias y particularmente la UNGA en terreno. Con mucho pesar sentimos la muerte de los funcionarios de esta agencia humanitaria en esta guerra. En tal sentido, reprobamos el ataque ocurrido contra la sede de esta agencia el jueves de la semana pasada en Jerusalén Este. Insistimos que la protección a la vida humana debe ser nuestra máxima prioridad y la protección a los civiles es una obligación fundamental. Por esto se debe respetar la Carta de la ONU, el derecho internacional y el derecho internacional humanitario. Indudablemente, este respeto ha sido infringido por los actos terroristas perpetrados por Hamas el 7 de octubre pasado y la respuesta indiscriminada del Estado de Israel sobre la población que habita en la Franja de Gaza y que también ha afectado a Cisjordania. Chile ha condenado sin matices las acciones de Hamas, al igual que todo acto terrorista, hechos de violencia y hostilidades contra la población civil. Asimismo, exigimos la liberación inmediata y sin condiciones
unconditional
de todos
release
los
of all
aún en manos
hostages
de
still in the
Hamas,
hands of
velando
Hamas,
por su
who
bienestar
must
y
guarantee
trato
their
en
well-being
conformidad
and
al
proper
derecho
treatment
internacional.
in accordance with
Nos
international
inquieta el
law.
asedio impuesto por
We are
Israel
concerned
a la Franja de Gaza,
at
porque ha
the siege
significado dejar a
imposed
su
by Israel
población
on Gaza
sin sus necesidades
because it
básicas
has meant
cubiertas,
that the people there
incluido
are left
alimentos,
without basic
agua,
needs,
medicinas y
including
combustible,
food, water,
provocando
medicine,
hambre
fuel.
generalizada y
This has led
enfermedades.
to widespread hunger
Condenamos la
and
ofensiva
disease.
militar de
We
Israel
condemn
contra la
Israel's
ciudad de
military
Rafah.
offensive against the
Las
city of
consecuencias de esta
Rafah. The
operación militar
consequences of this
pueden ser
military
nefastas en
operation
varios aspectos
can
y
be
solo
devastating
dilatan
in many
conseguir la
ways
paz.
and will only
Nos
delay
sumamos
the
a la
achievement of
preocupación
peace.
por los
We
antecedentes
join
sobre el
in concerns
descubrimiento de
expressed by
fosas
previous
comunes
speakers
en los hospitales de
about the
Nasser
discovery
y
of mass
Al-Shifa
graves in the
y sus
hospitals of
alrededores
Nasser
en
and
Gaza,
Al-Shifa and
donde fueron
in
enterrados
the
varios
neighboring
cientos de
areas in
cuerpos,
Gaza,
entre
where
ellos
several
mujeres,
hundred
niños
bodies
y
were
personas
found
mayores.
buried, including
Sobre
bodies of
esto,
women, children, and
agradecemos a
older
los 15
persons.
miembros del
We are
Consejo de
grateful to the
Seguridad
15 members
que
of the
tuvieron la
Security Council
capacidad de
who were
llegar
able
al
to
consenso
arrive
el
at a
viernes 10 con
consensus
una declaración
on
de
Friday the
prensa.
10th through
Chile
a press
insiste por un
statement.
alto al fuego inmediato y
Chile insists
permanente,
on an
un
immediate
mayor
and
flujo de
permanent
asistencia
ceasefire with a
humanitaria
greater
hacia
influx of
Gaza,
humanitarian
garantías para el
assistance to
acceso
Gaza,
pleno, inmediato,
guaranteeing the
seguro,
full,
sin
immediate,
trabas y
safe,
sostenido de la ayuda
unfettered, and
humanitaria,
sustained
es
access for
decir, que se
humanitarian
eliminen
aid.
todos los
In other
obstáculos a
words,
dicha
all
asistencia
obstacles
y
to that
facilitar el uso
assistance
de
must
todas
be
las rutas
eliminated,
terrestres
and the use of
disponibles
all
para
available
ingresar a
land
la
routes
Franja de Gaza.
for entry into Gaza
Observamos que
must
las
be
repercusiones
facilitated.
y las
We have seen
ramificaciones
that
de
the
este conflicto
repercussions
en el
and
resto de la
ramifications
región
of this
son de
conflict
profunda
in the
preocupación
remainder of the
por la
region are of
prolongación de
great
la
concern
violencia.
as the
Todos
violence
estos
continues.
actos han sido condenados
All
por la
of these
mayoría
acts
de
have
la
been
comunidad
condemned by the
internacional.
majority of the
Por
international
esto hacemos
community.
eco del llamado del
We
propio
therefore
secretario
echo
general
the
y los
appeal by the
respectivos
Secretary
jefes de
General
distintas agencias de la
and
ONU
the
para
appeals by
disminuir las
the heads
tensiones.
of various UN
Animamos los
agencies
esfuerzos
to
de la
reduce
coordinadora
tensions. We
humanitaria y
encourage
de la
the efforts
reconstrucción
of the
en Gaza,
Humanitarian
señora
Reconstruction
Sigrid
Coordinator in
en
Gaza,
sus labores y
Ms.
esperamos
Sigrid
que
Kaag,
reciba todas las facilidades
in
para
her
llevar a
work,
cabo
and
su
we hope
cometido.
that she will be granted every
Alentamos
facility
a
and
todas las
support as she
partes
carries out her
involucradas, así
tasks.
como a la
We
comunidad
encourage all
internacional,
parties
a
involved
seguir trabajando para
and as
terminar
well as the
esta guerra.
international community
Esto
to
solo
continue
es
to work
posible
to end
a
this
través de la
war.
vía
This is
diplomática
only
y el
possible
diálogo.
through diplomatic
Reconocemos los
means and
esfuerzos
dialogue.
y
We
resultados
recognize
que
the
países
efforts and
amigos
the
han
results
logrado
which
para
friendly countries
reducir
have
las
achieved
tensiones.
to reduce tensions.
Destacamos las tres
We
resoluciones
underscore the
aprobadas en
three
el Consejo de
resolutions
Seguridad
adopted by the
en pos de
Security
conseguir el
Council
cese
in an
al
effort
fuego,
to achieve a
aminorarlo o
ceasefire
brindar facilidades a la ayuda humanitaria.
and to
La
provide
2712 y la
humanitarian aid. I'm referring
2720
to
adoptadas
resolutions
el año pasado y
2712 and
especialmente la
2720 adopted
2728 del
last year,
25 de
and in
marzo.
particular,
Recordamos que
Resolution
todas las resoluciones de
2728
este órgano
adopted
son
on March
vinculantes y
25th.
deben ser
We recall that all
acatadas y
these
respetadas.
resolutions of the Council are
Señor
binding
Presidente,
and
Chile
must be
promueve la
complied with
solución de
and
los dos
respected.
estados y el derecho de Israel y Palestina a vivir en armonía dentro de fronteras internacionales seguras y reconocidas y con total respeto a los derechos humanos de todos sus habitantes. Hacemos un llamado urgente para dar cabal y pronto cumplimiento a las resoluciones pertinentes que respaldan el derecho del pueblo palestino a constituir un Estado soberano, como son las resoluciones 181 y 242 de esta Asamblea General, y también aquellas relacionadas como la resolución 2334 del Consejo de Seguridad, donde se reafirma que el establecimiento de asentamientos por parte de Israel en el territorio palestino ocupado, incluida Jerusalén Oriental, no tiene validez legal y constituye una violación del derecho internacional. Chile siempre ha reafirmado como prioridad de su política exterior el contribuir a alcanzar una solución pacífica en el Medio Oriente, expresando constantemente nuestro apoyo a una solución justa y duradera conforme a las resoluciones de las Naciones Unidas. Subrayamos que las medidas cautelares adoptadas por la Corte Internacional de Justicia deben ser cumplidas por todas las partes. Recordamos que Chile, junto con México, remitió a la Corte Penal Internacional un escrito sobre la situación en Palestina para reforzar la investigación de los presuntos crímenes de guerra y crímenes de lesa humanidad cometidos en Gaza, Cisjordania, Jerusalén Este e Israel. Para Chile, el esclarecimiento de los hechos y responsabilidades, así como la rendición de cuentas, son esenciales para poner fin a la impunidad y prevenir la futura comisión de crímenes internacionales. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of Chile. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain.
Señor presidente, este debate tiene lugar en el contexto de una situación extremadamente grave en Gaza, donde una ofensiva militar en Rafah agravaría la devastadora crisis humanitaria y provocará una mayor inestabilidad, si cabe, regional, que debemos evitar. Por ello, España sigue exigiendo un acuerdo para un alto al fuego inmediato que permita la entrada masiva y sin trabas de ayuda humanitaria en Gaza y la liberación inmediata de todos los rehenes israelíes. Tan pronto como se produzca un alto al fuego, debemos trabajar para consolidarlo y comenzar la gestión post-crisis. Será imprescindible apoyar a la autoridad palestina, que debe asumir el gobierno en Gaza y Cisjordania. Condenamos el ataque contra las instalaciones de UNGA en Jerusalén que tuvo lugar la semana pasada y recordamos la obligación que establece el derecho internacional humanitario de proteger a los trabajadores humanitarios. Señor presidente, las aspiraciones nacionales de israelíes y palestinos y su deseo de vivir en paz y seguridad son pretensiones legítimas que deben tener respuesta. La ausencia de una solución satisfactoria está en el origen de este largo ciclo de violencia. España acoge con satisfacción la adopción de la resolución el pasado viernes que mi país apoyó y copatrocinó. La resolución permite reforzar las modalidades de participación de Palestina en esta asamblea y marca el comienzo del proceso de materialización de la solución de los dos estados, de la que el reconocimiento de Palestina a título nacional es un elemento fundamental. Por eso España ha tomado la decisión de reconocer a Palestina como Estado próximamente, sumándose a los más de 140 países que representan un creciente consenso de la comunidad internacional. Con estas decisiones dotaremos de mayor legitimidad al gobierno palestino, expulsando el extremismo del espacio público. Un Estado palestino es la mejor garantía de seguridad para Israel y para la región. Además, buscamos equilibrar el debate entre las partes en las negociaciones que tendrán lugar para finalizar el proceso de paz que echó a andar en la Conferencia de Madrid hace más de 30 años. Por último, con el reconocimiento buscamos reforzar la coherencia y el respeto a la legalidad internacional. No tenemos dobles aseros. Señor presidente, con objeto de avanzar en la materialización de los dos estados, España ha propuesto una conferencia de paz con las partes y con la comunidad internacional. Esta propuesta ya ha sido respaldada por la Unión Europea, la Liga de Estados Árabes y la Organización de Cooperación Islámica. más de 80 de los estados que conformamos esta Asamblea General. Por eso reiteramos el llamamiento para que esta Organización de las Naciones Unidas haga suya esta propuesta y dirija el proceso. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of Spain. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of El Salvador.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Han pasado 26 años
26
desde que
years
se
have
convocó
passed
por primera vez
since
este 10º
the
periodo
very first
extraordinario de
time
sesiones
the
de emergencia en abril
emergency,
de
the 10th special
1997.
session
Hoy,
of
esta
the General
Asamblea
Assembly
delibera
was held in
nuevamente sobre la
1997.
cuestión en el Medio
Once
Oriente,
again, the General
en un
Assembly is meeting
contexto
on
en
the
el que
issue of the
millones de
Middle East, in a
personas han
context
huido
where
de sus
millions of
hogares en
people have
busca
fled
de
their
refugio.
homes seeking refuge
Decenas de
elsewhere.
miles, en su
Tens of
mayoría
thousands of
mujeres
them,
y
most of
niños,
them
han perdido
women
sus
and
vidas,
children, have
y la
lost their
crisis
lives,
humanitaria,
and the humanitarian
lejos de mejorar,
crisis
se agudiza
is
cada día más.
worsening every day,
Mi país
rather than
suma
improving.
su voz de
My
preocupación por
country
las
joins its
penurias que
voice
vive
of
la población
concern
de Gaza,
at the
sin
suffering
la
of the
posibilidad de
people in the
cubrir sus
Gaza Strip.
necesidades
They
más
cannot
básicas,
even meet their
como
most basic
alimentos,
needs, such
agua,
as
suministros
food, water,
médicos,
medical
afectando de
supplies.
manera
This
directa
has
la
directly
vida de miles de
impacted the
personas
lives of
inocentes.
thousands of innocent people.
Abordar con seriedad
To
y determinación la plena
address
membresía del
the
Estado de
full
Palestina en
membership
Naciones
of
Unidas
Palestine in the
se
United
plantea en las
Nations
condiciones actuales como un
is part
imperativo.
of the current
El Salvador
situation,
reconoce
and it is an
y tiene relaciones
imperative.
con
We
Palestina
recognize
desde
and
hace más
have
de una
had
década
relations with
y está
Palestine for more than a
consternado
decade,
por el
and
exacerbado
we are very
sufrimiento en su
concerned
pueblo.
by the great
Mi
suffering of
país,
its
por
people.
ello,
My country,
no ha dudado
therefore,
en brindar un
has
firme
had no
apoyo a
doubt
la
in
resolución
providing firm
adoptada
support
en
for
esta
this
sesión
resolution
especial de
adopted at
emergencia.
this ESS.
Admitir al Estado de Palestina
Admitting the
como
state of
miembro pleno de
Palestine as a
Naciones Unidas
full-fledged
es
member
un
of the
paso
United
crucial
Nations is a
hacia
crucial
el logro
step
de una solución
towards the
justa
achievement of a
y
just
duradera al
and
conflicto
lasting
y la
solution
estabilidad
to this
también del Medio
conflict
Oriente.
and to ensure
Es
stability in the
una
Middle East.
reafirmación
It
del
is a
compromiso de los estados
reaffirmation
que
of the
conforman
states'
estas Naciones
commitment,
Unidas
the
de
states which
defender
make
sus
up
propios
this
principios
United
y
Nations,
propósitos,
to
asegurando el
fulfill
pleno
their own
respeto de los
purposes and
derechos y la
principles,
dignidad del
fully
pueblo
respecting the
palestino,
dignity and the rights of the
incluyendo su
Palestinian
derecho a la
people, including
autodeterminación
their right
y
to
también vivir en paz.
self-determination and also to live in peace.
Señor presidente,
Mr.
tal como lo
President,
hemos expresado
as we have
recientemente,
said recently,
lamentamos
we regret
que el Consejo de
the
Seguridad
fact
se haya
that
ocupado
the
de esta cuestión
Security
desde hace
Council
más de
has been
7
addressing
décadas
this issue for
y
more
que
than 7
actuando
decades.
en nombre de toda la
And
membresía
acting
de
on
Naciones
behalf of the
Unidas
entire membership
y
of the
habiendo
United
celebrado
Nations
centenares de sesiones
and having
oficiales,
adopted
no ha sido
hundreds of
capaz de
official
proveer
statements, it
una
has
solución
not been
amplia,
capable
justa
of
y
adopting a
duradera a
fair,
la cuestión de
lasting,
Palestina.
wide-reaching solution to the
Hacemos por ello
Palestinian
un
issue.
llamado a que el
And
Consejo
therefore,
de Seguridad
we appeal to the
reconozca la
Security
necesidad
Council
de
to
que el pueblo
recognize the
palestino
need for the
ejerza
Palestinian
su
people
derecho a la
to
libre
exercise their
determinación
right to
y haga de la
self-determination
solución biestatal
and
una
to
realidad.
make the two-state solution a
La
reality.
posición de El Salvador
The
ha sido
position of El
coherente
Salvador
y
has been
consistente a través
consistent
de los años.
throughout the years.
Abogaremos siempre por una
We will
solución
always call
pacífica
for a
y
peaceful
definitiva al
and
conflicto
a
en Medio Oriente,
definitive solution to the Middle
cimentada
East issue.
en la existencia de dos estados
We
y
recognize the
reconociendo
need
la
for two
voluntad
states.
expresa de las
That is
resoluciones
the express,
vinculantes del Consejo de Seguridad
will expressed
y también
in
las
the
resoluciones
binding
de la Asamblea
resolutions of
General
the
de
Security
Naciones
Council
Unidas.
as well as in the resolutions of the General
Permítame
Assembly.
reafirmar
Let me
que admitir
reaffirm
al Estado de
that
Palestina como
in
miembro
admitting
pleno
Palestine
de
as
esta
a full-fledged
organización
member to this
es hoy más
organization,
importante que
today
nunca.
that effort
El
is
Salvador
more
reitera su
important than
apoyo
ever.
al
El
derecho del
Salvador
pueblo palestino
supports the
a su
Palestinian
libre
people
determinación.
and their right to self-determination.
Exhortamos al Consejo de
We
Seguridad
urge
a
the Security
reconsiderar de
Council
manera
to
favorable este asunto de máximo
reconsider
interés
this
global y
issue
reafirme
of
su
maximum
compromiso
international
con los derechos de
importance and to
paz,
take a positive
justicia,
stance
igualdad y derechos
for
humanos para
justice,
todos los
peace and
pueblos.
humanity and for the rights of all
Si bien esta
peoples.
resolución no
While this
otorga a
resolution
Palestina el
does
estatus
not
de
give
Estado miembro
Palestine
pleno en esta
the
organización, consideramos
status of
que
full-fledged
esta
membership in this
fortalecerá
organization, we believe
la
that it
práctica
will
consuetudinaria
help
y allanará su
support
participación
our
en
customary
diferentes
practice
espacios
and its
multilaterales.
involvement in a number of
Este contexto
international
permitirá
fora.
al
This
Estado de
context
Palestina
will enable
ejercer
the Palestinian state
progresivamente su legítimo
progressively
derecho
to
de
exercise its
intervenir de manera
legitimate
más
right
efectiva.
have a more fair and equal impact on the work of the United Nations. El Salvador joins in solidarity with the Palestinian people, and we reiterate our commitment to peace and security and justice in the region, with full respect for international law and also for the UN Charter. Let me conclude
con la reafirmación de mi país a su compromiso de trabajar en colaboración con todos los Estados miembros para alcanzar una solución pacífica y duradera a este conflicto. Confiamos en que esta Asamblea General, a través de la sesión especial de emergencia, continuará actuando con determinación para poner fin al sufrimiento del pueblo palestino. Muchísimas gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the distinguished representative of El Salvador. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brunei Darussalam.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. At the outset, Brunei Darussalam aligns itself with the joint statement delivered by Mauritania on behalf of the OIC, as well as the joint statement delivered by Uganda on behalf of the NAM. Mr. President, thank you for convening this 10 Emergency Special Session ESS in light of the recent failure of the UN Security Council in considering the UN membership for the State of Palestine. Brunei Darussalam has consistently advocated for the rights of the Palestinian people and have stood in solidarity with them, recognizing their inalienable rights to self-determination and statehood. We stand firm in our support for the State of Palestine to be accorded permanent membership to the United Nations. We deeply regret that the use of the veto has hampered the realization of a very important resolution, one that would allow for the State of Palestine to be granted a full membership in the UN, as we believe that it would represent a significant stride towards attaining enduring peace in the Middle East. Mr. President, Brunei Darussalam fully supports the resolution that has been tabled at this resumed ESS, and we welcome the adoption of this historic resolution. We must exhaust all efforts to ensure the admission of the State of Palestine as a full-fledged member of the United Nations. Mr. President, Brunei Darussalam unequivocally condemns the occupying power's military operation in Rafah and subsequent takeover of the Rafah crossing, a vital passage for the delivery of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. This unacceptable move by the occupying power represents a dangerous escalation that has killed more innocent civilians, including women and children, and ignores the international calls to protect the safety and lives of millions of Palestinians seeking refuge in the area. The situation in Palestine is already a humanitarian crisis of profound proportion perpetuated by the occupying powers' continued disregard of international law with impunity. There must be a halt to all the violence, injustice, and oppression by the occupying power against the Palestinians. Mr. President, it is also important to ensure that the root causes of the conflict are resolved to prevent further destabilization and escalation of violence in the region, with the aim to bring about a permanent solution to the conflict. Towards this end, we urge the international community to remain resolute in their commitment to the two-state solution towards achieving an independent state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Brunei Darussalam. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Oman.
شكرا سعادة الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President,
في مستهل
it is a pleasure for me,
نيابة عن
first
وسط
and
سلطنة عمان
foremost, on
أن
behalf of
أتقدم
my
إليكم ببالغ
country,
الشكر
Oman
على عقد
to
هذه
thank
الجلسة
you for
والتي
having
تأتي في أعقاب فشل
convened
مجلس
this
الأمن
meeting
منح
and
العضوية
this
الكاملة
following the failure of the Security
فلسطين
Council to grant
في
a
الأمم
full
المتحدة.
accession of Palestine
وفي
to
هذا
the United
السياق
Nations.
ترحب
In this
سلطنة
regard,
عمان
my
بتصويت أعضاء
country
الجمعية العامة للأمم
applauds
المتحدة
the vote by the General
بأغلبية
Assembly
ساحقة على
with
القرار الذي يدعم
an
حق دولة
overwhelming
فلسطين
majority
في
vote on
الحصول على العضوية
resolution
الكاملة
in favor of
بالأمم المتحدة.
Palestine, the state of Palestine's membership to
ونشير
the
هنا إلى
United
أن الأغلبية
Nations.
العالمية
The global majority has exhorted the Security Council to recognize the state of Palestine. This is a practical way to allow us to implement the two-state solution and to achieve peace in line with resolutions under international law. We fully align ourselves with the statements delivered by the UAE on behalf of the Arab state, as well as the statement delivered by Mauritania on behalf of the OIC and Uganda on behalf of
والتي أكدت جميعها على دعم المجتمع الدولي لمطلب دولة فلسطين المشروع
urge the international community to support the
الحصول على
legitimate
العضوية
request of
الكاملة
the state of
في
Palestine
هيئة الأمم
to
المتحدة
membership at
وذلك
full
أسوة بباقي
membership
دول
at
العالم.
the United
سعادة
Nations.
الرئيس
Like
على
all
صعيد
other
آخر
countries
متصل
in the
بالأوضاع في
world.
الأراضي الفلسطينية
Mr.
المحتلة
President,
تعرب سلطنة
when it comes
عمان
to the
عن
situation
بالغ
on the
القلق
occupied Palestinian territory,
لاستمرار
my
التصعيد
country
العسكري الذي
is
تمارسه
very much
قوات الاحتلال
concerned in light
الإسرائيلي
of the military
وجرائم الحرب
escalation carried out
والإبادة
by the Israeli
ضد
occupying
المدنيين
power,
العزل في
as
قطاع
well
غزة
as
والأراضي الفلسطينية
the
المحتلة
deaths and war crimes
وتحذر من مغبة
of
العمليات
Palestinian people in
العسكرية
Palestinian cities.
التي تقوم بها
The
قوات
military
الاحتلال
operations that
الإسرائيلية
are
في
being
مدينة
carried
رفح
out by
والتي
the
تنذر بآثار
occupying power
كارثية
in
خطيرة
Rafah
قد
will
تؤدي
have
إلى توسيع
devastating
نطاق الصراع
consequences that are liable to expand the conflict and further foment tensions in the region. My country, the Sultanate of Oman, urges the international community to immediately intervene to end this war and to end the barbaric acts being perpetrated by hinges on the establishment of a Palestinian state and granting Palestine a status of full membership at the United Nations. This is a strategic priority which is of paramount importance. It is a global demand on the part of the international community. We call upon the Security Council to reconsider the question of the admission of Palestine as a member of the United Nations. The rejection of this kind of a request will threaten international peace and security and undermines the credibility of the Security Council, which has embraced a double standards approach when it comes to the question of Palestine. To conclude, we reiterate our support for peace efforts and the two-state solution with the peaceful coexistence of the two states. We reject all plans that are at variance with peace and the two-state solution, and we will support the legitimate request of the Palestinian people and the request to gain full membership in the United Nations. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Oman. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Morocco.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. أود في البداية أن أشكر السيد رئيس الجمعية العامة على الاستجابة لطلب المجموعات العربية والإسلامية وعدم الانحياز لاستئناف أعمال الدورة الاستثنائية الطارئة العاشرة. لقد رحبت المملكة المغربية باعتماد الجمعية العامة يوم الجمعة الماضي القرار الذي يدعم طلب دولة فلسطين للحصول على العضوية الكاملة بمنظمة الأمم المتحدة ويوصي مجلس الأمن بإعادة النظر إيجابا في طلب قبولها كما يمنحها مزيدا من الحقوق
considered this matter and which grants further rights to Palestine within our organization, the United Nations. We were among the first countries to co-sponsor this resolution. This resolution is a critical step in turn when it comes to the accession of Palestine to full membership, and its full membership at the United Nations is a step towards the two-state solution. And my country, under the aegis of His Majesty the King, it has been chairing the Commission on Jerusalem, and we wish to reiterate the legitimate demands of Palestine, inter alia the right to establish a Palestinian state within the 4 June 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Mr. President, there is a genuine humanitarian catastrophe that has been unfolding for the past 7 months in Gaza, and this has repercussions for both the region and the entire world. We have condemned the Israeli military actions undertaken in the Strip, these actions which run counter to international humanitarian law. There are thousands of victims, civilian casualties, health infrastructure is being destroyed, and educational infrastructure is also being destroyed, which undermines the ability to uphold IHL. We emphasize the need for a ceasefire and the need for access to humanitarian assistance in sufficient quantities in a safe, secure, and unimpeded way in the Gaza Strip. And my country has participated in these efforts since the outbreak of this crisis, and we have done so following the orders of His Majesty the King. Furthermore, we wish to reiterate the importance of protection of civilians and the importance of the protection of humanitarian personnel in line with IHL. Furthermore, there's a need to release the hostages and detainees and prisoners. Mr. President, my country believes that it is not possible to accept the threat of expansion of the conflict, including into Rafah. This would have devastating humanitarian consequences. Moreover, we categorically reject
وتدعو إلى وقف الإجراءات الإسرائيلية الأحادية التي تضع الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة بما فيها القدس الشريف والمسجد الأقصى المبارك فمدينة القدس يجب أن تبقى أرضا للقاء ورمزا للتعايش السلمي بالنسبة لأتباع الديانة التوحيدية الثلاث ومركزا لقيم الاحترام المتبادل والحوار. أود التذكير بما جاء في الخطاب الثاني لجلالة الملك محمد السادس نصره الله إلى المشاركين في القمة الخامسة عشر لمنظمة التعاون الإسلامي التي انعقدت في العاصمة الغامبية بنجول بتاريخ 4 مايو 2024 وأقتبس.
In 2024, and I quote, we call upon affluent countries to shoulder their historic responsibility and to embrace the path of reason to meaningfully engage in reversing this devastating situation and to establish conducive conditions for a meaningful peace process, and this with the aim of achieving a two-state solution. End of quote. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Morocco. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mauritius.
Mr. President, Mauritius welcomes the adoption of the General Assembly resolution declaring that Palestine is qualified for full membership and therefore should be admitted in the United Nations. The resounding support garnered from the General Assembly on this historic resolution is a meaningful achievement. We have witnessed the triumph of solidarity and justice towards Palestine and the Palestinian people as the international community affirms its rightful place among the family of nations. The result achieved is more than timely and is the logical consequence of the adoption of the 2012 UN resolution granting the status of non-member observer to Palestine, which Mauritius supported. Mr. President, Mauritius has consistently stood in solidarity with the Palestinian people, affirming their legitimate right to self-determination and their aspirations for the establishment of a sovereign, viable, and secure Palestine state through peaceful means. We are convinced that the admission of Palestine as a full-fledged member of our organization would be a major step ahead towards the recognition and implementation of the two-state solution in accordance with all relevant United Nations resolutions and international law. Mauritius has consistently supported the application made by Palestine for membership in the UN, including its admission as a member of the UNESCO in 2011. Since 2012, we have actively advocated for Palestine's full membership in the United Nations through various resolutions. We hold the view that the United Nations and the international community bear a solemn responsibility to uphold the dignity of the Palestinian people and safeguard their fundamental rights, including the right to statehood and security. Furthermore, Mauritius believes that Palestine fulfills all necessary criteria to be acknowledged as a sovereign state. Its accession, therefore, would be in accordance with Article 4 of the United Nations Charter. Mauritius joins the call for the Security Council to reconsider Palestine's application for membership. The dire humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza underscores the urgent need for action on part of our organization. We firmly believe that granting full membership status to Palestine will pave the way for peace, facilitated under the auspices of the United Nations and the international community. Mr. President, Palestine has for far too long been denied the right to be fully part of this organization. We believe that this resolution will pave the way for a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mauritius. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Dominica on behalf of the Caribbean community.
Mr. President, Excellencies, colleagues, I have the honor to take the floor on behalf of the 14 member states of the Caribbean community. On this historic occasion, CARICOM affirmed our collective support for this important General Assembly resolution. We did so because CARICOM recognizes the right of the Palestinian people to their own state, and because we believe this state is entitled to take its rightful place here in the United Nations. This position is in keeping with relevant resolutions adopted by this General Assembly. We take this opportunity to reiterate our great distress at the ongoing violence and deteriorating situation in Gaza, which has resulted in the tragic loss of civilian lives, including the deaths of women and children on an unprecedented scale, and widespread displacement and suffering. We are particularly concerned at the escalating situation in Rafah and urge maximum restraint to avoid a catastrophe of unprecedented proportion. CARICOM reiterates its strong condemnation of the attacks by Hamas and the taking of hostages on 7 October 2023, as well as of the Israeli actions that violate international humanitarian law and the human rights of the Palestinian people. In this regard, CARICOM urges an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza and safe and unimpeded access for the delivery of adequate and sustained humanitarian assistance. We strongly advocate full compliance with the rule of law and therefore call for the unconditional release of all hostages. We further call for the release of all those illegally detained. CARICOM reaffirms its unwavering commitment to a holistic roadmap towards a two-state solution. In keeping with the United Nations Security Council, Resolution 242, as the only viable path to peace between Israelis and Palestinians. The community therefore calls for a renewed commitment to a peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through meaningful dialogue and negotiation, and calls upon the international community to play a constructive role in facilitating a lasting solution to the conflict and achieving a durable peace that guarantees the human rights, dignity, and security of both sides. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegation representative of Dominica, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Maldives.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank you for resuming the 10th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly. The United Nations was founded on the principles of supporting the rights of all peoples to determine their own political, economic, and social destinies. The General Assembly remains the only dedicated space where we, the people of the United Nations, can convene to advocate for justice, for human rights and dignity, for peace and freedom. We all agree that the peace is long overdue. We have made calls for a ceasefire for de-escalation. We have desperately pleaded for the protection of Palestinian civilians and their legal and humanitarian rights. The difficult point of contention within this hall has been on the question of how to bring a just and lasting peace. The goal must be to take action for peace. The Maldives commends the United Arab Emirates for taking the initiative to put forward the resolution determining that Palestine is ready to be admitted as a member of the United Nations. As a proud co-sponsor of this resolution, we are moved by overwhelming support extended by member states to the Palestinian cause by voting yes on the resolution. Our collective call sends a strong message to the Security Council to reconsidering the application of the Palestinian for full UN membership favorably. The Maldives commends the tireless efforts on the ground in Gaza, at the United Nations, and across the world to stop the suffering borne by the Palestinian people. The Maldives recognizes the relentless determinations of organizations like UNRWA in Palestine. They are the heroes who have allowed us to hold on to hope against all the odds. In the face of the immense humanitarian tragedy taking place in Palestine, the Maldives reiterates its call to all member states to act with urgency. Madam President, Israel's impunity must end. Israel's rejection of the ceasefire last Monday demonstrates that its intention has always been to land grab, enforce apartheid policies, and commit genocide. The systematic, deliberate, and brutal attacks against the Palestinian people did not begin on 7th October. Israel has inflicted collective punishment, mass destruction, forced displacement, and unimaginable trauma on the Palestinian people over 7 decades. Israel's ongoing operation in Rafah is the latest and most terrible of its aggression. There are more than 1 million Palestinians in Rafah who have been driven into the city for shelter. Many of them are children. Many of them are sick, injured, malnourished, traumatized, and living with disabilities because of Israelis' action. Israeli supporters must do more than make hollow statements to hold it accountable. The Maldives calls on Israeli supporters to stop supplying Israel with weapons and to make Israel comply with their obligations under international law and international humanitarian law. We can only bring comprehensive solution to the conflict in the Middle East with a recognition of Palestine. The Maldives remains resolute in supporting the Palestinian people in their inalienable right to self-determination. The Maldives further reiterates its call for establishment of a sovereign and independent state of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital in line with the pre-1967 borders. Maldives once again implores the Security Council to favorably reconsider the admission of the State of Palestine as a member of the United Nations, as urged by the General Assembly resolution adopted on Friday. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Maldives, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Madam President, I wish to thank the President of the General Assembly for resuming this emergency special session. Vietnam aligns itself with the statement made by the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Madam President, more than 7 months into the Gaza conflict, peace prospects remain elusive. Fears of escalation into regional war are growing amidst direct confrontation between the region's major military powers. There's no sign of diminished violence or an end to civilian deaths. Vietnam is deeply concerned about these increased hostilities and tension. The impending ground offensive on Rafah in particular would take an unimaginable toll on civilians, especially on women and children, and further aggravate the ongoing humanitarian crisis. Vietnam strongly condemns all forms of indiscriminate violence, targeting civilians and critical civilian infrastructure. We firmly oppose all acts in violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of any state. In this regard, Vietnam urges all parties to exercise utmost restraint, engage in dialogues, and strictly abide by international law, the UN Charter, and relevant UN resolutions. We renew our call for an immediate cessation of hostilities and violence and unconditional release of all hostages. We urge that all measures are taken to ensure unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance and reaffirm Vietnam's continued support for UNRWA's central role in this regard. Vietnam supports all ongoing diplomatic efforts towards an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza to put a stop to civilian casualties and sufferings. In the long run, a lasting, just, and peaceful resolution to the Gaza conflict and the Middle East peace process can only be achieved through the two-state solution in conformity with international law and relevant UN resolutions. We are disappointed that last month the Security Council once again failed to reach agreement on the overdue admission of Palestine as a UN member state. This goes against the will of not only the Palestinian people, but also the majority of the international community. These artificial and politically motivated obstacles continue to hinder Palestine's legitimate quest for further membership. Mr. President, Vietnam stands with the Palestinian people in the plight to exercise their inalienable right to self-determination and supports Palestine's early admission to the United Nations. Our long-standing solidarity and unwavering support for the Palestinian people are deeply rooted in our common and long struggle for sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness of our peoples. Vietnam's own path to the UN membership was a long and an arduous one. It fell victim to the Security Council veto on numerous occasions. The many barriers and obstacles, however, did not stop the irreversible course of history and prevent the peace-loving nation of Vietnam's eventual admission to the United Nations in 1977. We witnessed history last Friday as the State of Palestine inched closer to full membership with the adoption of the GA resolution that allows Palestine greater engagement in the work of the UN. Vietnam co-sponsored and voted in favor of this monumental resolution together with a large majority of this august body. The legitimate aspirations of millions of Palestinian people, Palestinian for peace, development, and equality must not be denied. Palestine's admission to the UN as a full member would be the most conducive to the two-state solution, as it lays the ground for meaningful negotiations between the parties on an equal footing. And that would be an important step towards achieving sustainable peace and stability in the Middle East and beyond. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Vietnam, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of plurinational state of Bolivia.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President.
I'd
like to begin by thanking you for convening this meeting to address one of the most important priority issues at the United Nations so that finally we will see the light at the end of the tunnel for the Palestinian people. At the same time, I thank the UAE for introducing the draft resolution on admitting new members to the United Nations on behalf of the Arab group, and we endorse the statements made on Friday by the Republic of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on behalf of the group of friends in defense of the UN Charter.
Señora Presidenta,
Madam President,
las palabras y los discursos resultan siendo
words and
insuficientes
discourse
frente a la
are always
violencia,
insufficient in
el
the face of
derramamiento de
violence,
sangre y los ataques
bloodshed,
atroces
and
contra el pueblo
atrocious attacks
palestino,
against the
que han
Palestinian people.
alcanzado niveles absolutamente
They have
inhumanos,
reached
causando el
absolutely inhuman levels, causing
inimaginable de
unimaginable
niños,
suffering
mujeres,
for children,
ancianos,
women, the
personas
elderly,
inocentes,
and
que lo
innocent
único que
people.
desean es vivir
All they
en paz
wish
y
is to live
libertad.
in peace and freedom.
Israel, la potencia ocupante,
Israel, the
desde el pasado
occupying
7
power,
de octubre,
since
no ha
the 7th
cesado
of
un
October,
segundo sus intensos
has
bombardeos y
not
ataques
stopped for
contra los
1
territorios
second in its
palestinos.
shelling and attacks
Como
against
se ha
innocent
informado a la
Palestinian
fecha,
people.
más de
To date,
34,000
more than
personas han sido
34,000
asesinadas
people have been
y
killed,
1.7
and
millones de
1.7
personas
million
que
people,
representan cerca
which
del
represents some
75% de la población,
75% of the
han sido
population,
desplazadas
have been
en toda la
displaced
franja de Gaza
throughout the Gaza
porque ya
Strip
no existe ningún lugar
because there is
seguro
now
para
no
ellas
safe
y
place for
ellos.
them.
El próximo 15 de mayo los
On the
palestinos
15th of May, the
rememorarán
Palestinians will
el día del NAPCA,
recall
lo cual nos recuerda
the
los
NAPCA
hechos de
Day,
hace
which recalls the
76
events
años,
of 76
cuando el
years
mundo
ago,
observó
when the
con los
world
brazos cruzados
stood by
que
with its
cientos de
arms
miles de
crossed and
palestinos
watched hundreds of
fueran
thousands of
obligados a huir
Palestinians who
o
were
verse
forced to flee
expulsados de sus
or
hogares.
who were expelled
Y
from their
pareciera
homes.
que hoy
And it
estamos
seems
frente
today
a una inminente
that
ofensiva
we are
militar de Israel
facing,
en
we are
Rafah,
going to witness
a
an
pesar de
imminent
los
military
llamados de la
offensive by
comunidad
Israel in
internacional
Rafah,
para que se
despite the
evite
appeals of the
una
international
nueva acción
community to
genocida en
avoid
Gaza.
that, a new genocide in
Adicionalmente,
Gaza.
se ha
In addition to
bloqueado
that,
completamente el
there has been a
flujo de la ayuda
complete
humanitaria.
blockade on the influx of
Presidenta,
humanitarian aid.
aprovecho esta
President, I
oportunidad
take
para
this
compartir con
opportunity
ustedes
to
que la
share with
semana
you
pasada mi
that
país
last week
entregó más de 90 toneladas de ayuda humanitaria en el puerto egipcio de Alejandría a la Media Luna Roja para que sea distribuido en la Franja de Gaza. Estas cargas contienen mayoritariamente medicinas, alimentos básicos, entre otros insumos, y hacemos un llamado para que no se obstaculice su distribución. Presidenta y distinguidos colegas, la Organización de las Naciones Unidas tiene una deuda histórica con el pueblo palestino, que hace más de 7 décadas le prometió constituir los dos estados, y lamentablemente al día de hoy se implementaron todas las decisiones relativas a Israel y por diversas circunstancias, no así los referidos a Palestina. Es un tiempo que la ONU, la comunidad internacional, haga cumplir todas las resoluciones pertinentes sobre el tema sin mayores dilaciones y obstáculos de Israel y su protector. Es por ello que mi país aplaude el compromiso y la decisión de todos los estados que votaron a favor de la resolución sobre la admisión de nuevos miembros de las Naciones Unidas, como lo hizo Bolivia copatrocinando y votando a favor, lo cual representa nuestro firme compromiso y apoyo a la admisión de Palestina como Estado miembro pleno de las Naciones Unidas. La inclusión de Palestina no solo es un acto de justicia y reconocimiento, sino también un pequeño paso hacia la paz y la estabilidad de la región. Palestina ha demostrado su compromiso con los principios y valores fundamentales de las Naciones Unidas y cumple con las prerrogativas de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, en particular con el requisito número 4 para su admisión como Estado miembro pleno de la ONU. Adicionalmente, al día de hoy, 143 Estados miembros de las Naciones Unidas reconocen a Palestina como un Estado soberano e independiente que ejerce sus derechos y asume sus obligaciones. Por otra parte, la admisión de Palestina como miembro de las Naciones Unidas es un paso fundamental hacia la construcción de un orden mundial más justo y equitativo, donde todas las naciones sean tratadas con igual respeto y dignidad. La aprobación mayoritaria a la resolución es la muestra del consenso mayoritario, por lo cual el Consejo de Seguridad debe reconsiderar de inmediato favorablemente esta cuestión, tomando en cuenta, además, la opinión consultiva de la Corte Internacional de Justicia del 28 de mayo de 1948 y en estricta conformidad con el artículo 4 de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Ni un paso atrás. Palestina hoy necesita de la solidaridad y la cooperación internacional, y es ahora que debemos entregarle certezas. Palestina será libre, soberana e independiente, con las fronteras anteriores a 1967, con Jerusalén Oriental como su capital. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of the plurinational state of Bolivia, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Señora Presidenta,
apoyamos la reanudación de este décimo periodo extraordinario de sesiones de emergencia de la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas. Cuba copatrocinó y apoyó el proyecto de resolución L30/L1 que se aprobó recientemente en esta Asamblea adopted in this General Assembly to allow for the admission of the State of Palestine as a full-fledged member of the UN organization. Without further delay, we must reverse the historic injustice which has denied the Palestinian people the right to participate on an equal footing in the United Nations. It's unacceptable and shameful that the government of the United States has self-proclaimed to lead democracy worldwide is once again
antidemocrático poder de veto para continuar con su apoyo cómplice a Israel y bloquear la posición claramente mayoritaria de la comunidad internacional. El Consejo de Seguridad fue concebido para actuar en nombre de los Estados miembros de las Naciones Unidas en el mantenimiento de la paz y seguridad internacionales, no para proteger los intereses hegemónicos de los Estados Unidos ni los desmanes de Israel.
Or the intentions of Israel. The international community cannot allow this unsustainable situation to continue. The veto power is an arbitrary power and is denied Palestine its rightful admission to the United Nations. This would be an essential step for working towards a wide, sweeping and fair and lasting solution to the Middle East problem.
El ejercicio real del derecho inalienable del pueblo palestino a la libre determinación y a construir su propio Estado independiente y soberano dentro de las fronteras anteriores a 1967 y con su capital en Jerusalén Oriental. No hay otra manera efectiva de detener de una vez y para siempre esta espiral de violencia, salvar vidas humanas y trazar un rumbo viable para la paz. Ya somos 144 los países que reconocemos al Estado de Palestina y la cifra continuará aumentando. El Estado de Palestina es un miembro activo de la comunidad internacional, de los foros multilaterales y es sujeto de derechos y obligaciones en diversos instrumentos internacionales. El proyecto de resolución que ha sido aprobado hace justicia al reconocer que Palestina cumple las condiciones para su admisión como miembro de la ONU. Señora Presidenta, Cuba demanda, una vez más, un cese al fuego inmediato y permanente en los territorios palestinos ilegalmente ocupados. Reclamamos poner fin a la violencia y a la retórica belicista. Debe garantizarse el suministro de ayuda humanitaria urgente y suficiente al pueblo palestino. Se impone evitar el desplazamiento forzoso de los palestinos de la tierra que, por derecho propio, les pertenece. Condenamos en los términos más enérgicos los asesinatos de civiles, especialmente mujeres, niños y trabajadores humanitarios del sistema de Naciones Unidas. Los bombardeos indiscriminados contra la población en Gaza y la destrucción de viviendas, hospitales e infraestructura civil, así como la privación de los servicios esenciales a la población, empeoran considerablemente la precaria situación humanitaria resultante del bloqueo de la franja y violan de manera flagrante el derecho internacional humanitario. Nada puede justificar tales acciones, que constituyen un castigo colectivo y son crímenes de guerra y de lesa humanidad. Aquellos que hoy se oponen con diferentes pretextos al cese de la violencia en Gaza como cuestión de la mayor urgencia, tendrán que asumir las responsabilidades por las graves consecuencias que ello implica. Cada momento de inacción costará más vidas inocentes. La historia no perdonará a los indiferentes y Cuba no estará entre ellos. Reafirmamos nuestra invariable solidaridad con la causa palestina. Cuba continuará contribuyendo en todo lo que esté a su alcance con los esfuerzos internacionales legítimos para poner fin a esta barbarie que hoy sufre el hermano pueblo palestino. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba, and I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
We all agree that the peace is long overdue. We have made calls for a ceasefire for de-escalation. We have desperately pleaded for the protection of Palestinian civilians and their legal and humanitarian rights. The difficult point of contention within this hall has been on the question of how to bring a just and lasting peace. The goal must be to take action for peace. The Maldives commends the United Arab Emirates for taking the initiative to put forward the resolution determining that Palestine is ready to be admitted as a member of the United Nations. As a proud co-sponsor of this resolution, we are moved by overwhelming support extended by member states to the Palestinian cause by voting yes on the resolution. Our collective call sends a strong message to the Security Council to reconsidering the application of the Palestinian for full UN membership favorably. The Maldives commends the tireless efforts on the ground in Gaza, at the United Nations, and across the world to stop the suffering borne by the Palestinian people. The Maldives recognizes the relentless determinations of organizations like UNRWA in Palestine. They are the heroes who have allowed us to hold on to hope against all the odds. In the face of the immense humanitarian tragedy taking place in Palestine, the Maldives reiterates its call to all member states to act with urgency. Madam President, Israel's impunity must end. Israel's rejection of the ceasefire last Monday demonstrates that its intention has always been to land grab, enforce apartheid policies, and commit genocide. The systematic, deliberate, and brutal attacks against the Palestinian people did not begin on 7th October. Israel has inflicted collective punishment, mass destruction, forced displacement, and unimaginable trauma on the Palestinian people over 7 decades. Israel's ongoing operation in Rafah is the latest and most terrible of its aggression. There are more than 1 million Palestinians in Rafah who have been driven into the city for shelter. Many of them are children. Many of them are sick, injured, malnourished, traumatized, and living with disabilities because of Israel's action. Israeli supporters must do more than make hollow statements to hold it accountable. The Maldives calls on Israeli supporters to stop supplying Israel with weapons and to make Israel comply with their obligations under international law and international humanitarian law. We can only bring comprehensive solution to the conflict in the Middle East with a recognition of Palestine. The Maldives remains resolute in supporting the Palestinian people in their inalienable right to self-determination. The Maldives further reiterates its call for establishment of a sovereign and independent state of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital in line with the pre-1967 borders. Maldives once again implores the Security Council to favorably reconsider the admission of the State of Palestine as a member of the United Nations, as urged by the General Assembly resolution adopted on Friday. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Maldives, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Madam President, I wish to thank the President of the General Assembly for resuming this emergency special session. Vietnam aligns itself with the statement made by the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Madam President, more than 7 months into the Gaza conflict, peace prospects remain elusive. Fears of escalation into regional war are growing amidst direct confrontation between the region's major military powers. There's no sign of diminished violence or an end to civilian deaths. Vietnam is deeply concerned about these increased hostilities and tension. The impending ground offensive on Rafah in particular would take an unimaginable toll on civilians, especially on women and children, and further aggravate the ongoing humanitarian crisis. Vietnam strongly condemns all forms of indiscriminate violence, targeting civilians and critical civilian infrastructure. We firmly oppose all acts in violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of any state. In this regard, Vietnam urges all parties to exercise utmost restraint, engage in dialogues, and strictly abide by international law, the UN Charter, and relevant UN resolutions. We renew our call for an immediate cessation of hostilities and violence and unconditional release of all hostages. We urge that all measures are taken to ensure unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance and reaffirm Vietnam's continued support for UNRWA's central role in this regard. Vietnam supports all ongoing diplomatic efforts towards an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza to put a stop to civilian casualties and sufferings. In the long run, a lasting, just, and peaceful resolution to the Gaza conflict and the Middle East peace process can only be achieved through the two-state solution in conformity with international law and relevant UN resolutions. We are disappointed that last month the Security Council once again failed to reach agreement on the overdue admission of Palestine as a UN member state. This goes against the will of not only the Palestinian people, but also the majority of the international community. These artificial and political motivated obstacles continue to hinder Palestine's legitimate quest for further membership. Mr. President, Vietnam stands with the Palestinian people in the plight to exercise their inalienable right to self-determination and supports Palestine's early admission to the United Nations. Our long-standing solidarity and unwavering support for the Palestinian people are deeply rooted in our common and long struggle for sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness of our peoples. Vietnam's own path to the UN membership was a long and arduous one. It fell victim to the Security Council veto on numerous occasions. The many barriers and obstacles, however, did not stop the irreversible course of history and prevent the peace-loving nation of Vietnam's eventual admission to the United Nations in 1977. We witnessed history last Friday as the State of Palestine inched closer to full membership with the adoption of the GA resolution that allows Palestine greater engagement in the work of the UN. Vietnam co-sponsored and voted in favor of this monumental resolution together with a large majority of this august body. The legitimate aspirations of millions of Palestinian people, Palestinians for peace, development, and equality must not be denied. Palestine's admission to the UN as a full member would be the most conducive to the two-state solution, as it lays the ground for meaningful negotiations between the parties on an equal footing. And that would be an important step towards achieving sustainable peace and stability in the Middle East and beyond. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Vietnam, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of plurinational state of Bolivia.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to begin by thanking you for convening this meeting to address one of the most important priority issues at the United Nations so that finally we will see the light at the end of the tunnel for the Palestinian people. At the same time, I thank the UAE for introducing the draft resolution on admitting new members to the United Nations on behalf of the Arab group, and we endorse the statements made on Friday by the Republic of Uganda on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the UN Charter. Madam President, words and discourse are always insufficient in the face of violence, bloodshed, and atrocious attacks against the Palestinian people. They have reached absolutely inhuman levels, causing unimaginable suffering for children, women, the elderly, and innocent people. All they wish is to live in peace and freedom. Israel, the occupying power, since the 7th of October, has not stopped for 1 second in its shelling and attacks against innocent Palestinians.